Okay, this is the post-general election 2024 Palestine peace interview. And hello and welcome everybody. This interview is aimed at putting Palestine on the agenda following the general election, which saw no questions on Palestine at the 3 local hustings that we had in town, and very little mention of Palestine nationally during the election's short campaigning period. So this interview aims to retrospectively fill that gap, whilst at the same time pitching the interview at debunking myths as an introduction to supporting Palestine. We'll also be looking at how the movement can go forward under a new government, and considering the worsening conditions and destruction in Gaza and the West Bank, and the deepening threat to peace in the wider area. So that's the aims of this interview. So now to the introductions. Eastbourne Solidarity is carrying out this interview. We are a multi-platform social media group promoting news and information on Eastbourne's area's local social justice and climate justice events and activism, and on the various businesses and arts that play to the similar tune of building community and putting people and planet before hard profit. So now to welcome to our 2 guests today. First of all, welcome to Debbie Smith from Eastbourne Palestine Solidarity Campaign. She has been campaigning locally since 2017 and has been pivotal in building the group from a small but dedicated core membership to a membership of around 400 or 500.
We've got that many supporters, yes.
Yeah. Today. So that's really built the Palestine Solidarity Campaign locally. And welcome to Keith Crane, who is the chair of Eastbourne Trade Council, who's a long-standing member of the Socialist Workers' Party and a trade union representative of the PCS, the Public and Commercial Services Union, civil servants. So I want to start out by each of you introducing yourself and the Pro Palestine work you are doing. So first of all, you, Debbie, you've got 2 minutes.
Okay, so well, as you said, we've been, the Eastbourne Palestine Solidarity Campaign has been going in Eastbourne for 7 years now. And we used to meet up monthly in the town centre, then it went to weekly, and since October the 7th, we've been in the town centre every week. We've also run lots of events in the town, very well attended, and sort of raising the profile of Palestine. And I think we see our main role, particularly before October the 7th, as just raising the awareness and being available to have conversations with people in Eastbourne. And we've had a really good response. We didn't know how it was going to go. There's a big movement in Brighton, another one in Hastings, but in Eastbourne it's been fairly positive. I first got involved, finding out anything about Palestine probably about 15 years ago, so I was quite late coming to it. I didn't know a lot about the formation of Palestine and Israel, and we went to a talk by a retired Methodist minister who'd been out in Palestine working as an EAPI, which is an ecumenical accompaniment program set up by the Quakers, where people just go out and they bear witness to what is happening in the hope that just their presence will de-escalate any violence at checkpoints. And I just felt I need to know more about this because I knew very little, and that eventually led to the becoming one of the founder members of Eastbourne Palestine Solidarity Campaign. Yeah, that's me.
Hi, yeah, And I first got involved in Palestine solidarity protests and the like in the 1980s. It was really my getting involved in the socialist movement and the Socialist Workers' Party that got me involved in supporting Palestine, because the SWP was founded by Tony Cliff, that's the name he used over here, who was a Jew born in Palestine, and wrote quite a lot and educated people quite well on the nature of Israel, and why Palestinian solidarity needed to be supported, and the role of what they call the international community, the role of what we call imperialism in the United States, Britain before the United States, in supporting Israel as a colonial settler state. And I think his analysis has stood the test of time. So I've been involved, along with lots of other issues, consistently from the 1980s, and I think it's quite heartening to see in Eastbourne the fact that there was already an established solidarity campaign here, and there's people are willing to listen. We've been on the street every Saturday campaigning on the issue. We've always had, either alongside the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, or we've had our socialist worker stalls, and we've always had the Freedom for Palestine placards up. We've had some very interesting conversations with supporters and detractors. But I think it's what's been quite interesting is how you discover the way in which people's views are shifting from those kinds of conversations. And I think there's been a notable shift in general as people understand that what's going on in Gaza is genocide, that it can't be supported, and there's been growing support over the months that have passed since October.
Thanks for that. Just one little comment. You were saying about the growing support. I think shortly after October the 7th, the polls showed that there was something like 54% for a permanent ceasefire. It's now gone up to, the figures are something like 85%. Like, it's just huge now. It might even be more than that. Anyway, the next set of questions, there's going to be 3 of them, are aimed at debunking myths. So the first question is, the International Criminal Justice Court has ruled there is a plausible case for genocide happening in Gaza. Did this all begin on October the 7th? Oh.
Well, to say it all began on October the 7th is to ignore 76 years of Israeli brutality and dehumanisation of the Palestinian people. It's probably, or certainly it's one of the most common phrases that is shouted at us in abuse at our stall. October the 7th, Anyway, to respond to this, I want to tell you about Abdul Aziz Rantisi, who some of you may know about, and some of you may not. But he was born in a town in Yibna, in Palestine in 1947. Yibna was part of the land allocated to Israel, and Abdul's family, along with other people of Yibna, were forced to leave their home and their town in 1948 during the Nakba, the catastrophe that saw over 750,000 Palestinians driven from their homes so that Israel could be created. Abdul's family were moved to Khan Yunis in the Gaza Strip. So if we fast forward 8 years, 1956, Abdul was 8 years old. The Israeli army came into Khan Yunis looking for terrorists. They rounded up men and young men and they executed them. Records show that at least 257 men were murdered, and mass graves were found with men bound and shot in the head. Abdul witnessed these executions as an 8-year-old boy, including that of his uncle. An Israeli soldier, Marek Geffen, who later became a journalist, recalled walking through the area after the massacre, and he described it as a dreadful sight, as a human slaughterhouse. The Israeli army then moved on to the nearby refugee camp, killing more men. This was also called Khan Yunis. Abdul went on to become a doctor, and he studied paediatric medicine at Alexandria University in Egypt, returning to Gaza to teach at the university. During the First Intifada, Abdul became a respected and popular spokesman for the Palestinians. He co-founded Hamas along with Ahmed Yassin. In March 2004, Yassin was assassinated and Abdul became leader of Hamas. 3 weeks later, Abdul was assassinated along with his 27-year-old son, and his widow, Jamila, was assassinated last year. 2 weeks before October the 7th, Israeli airstrikes hit Gaza for 3 days in a row during one of their regular aerial bombing raids on Gaza, which the Israelis call mowing the lawn. In 2023, in the illegally occupied West Bank, up until October the 7th, 234 Palestinians had been killed. And October the 4th, protesters in the West Bank were shot in the ankles. How anyone can say that, who knows anything about the history of Palestine, can say it all began on October the 7th is beyond comprehension.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that, you know, it's part of the narrative, isn't it? I mean, what happened on the 7th of October got a lot of media coverage, and suddenly all eyes were on that region of the world. And then what Israel then did is portrayed as a response to the activities on October the 7th. And the continual atrocities against the Palestinian people that were taking place on a regular basis over decades before that were not given the same media coverage. And so what you've got in people's consciousness is this idea that the genocidal assault on the population of Gaza is a response to the atrocities committed on the 7th of October. Whereas if anyone really looked into the area, they would understand that 7th of October, might not like it, but was a response to a whole series of events before that, including the continual bombing every now and again of Gaza to make sure that they couldn't develop, and whenever they rebuilt, find an excuse to bomb them again. Gaza was turned into an open-air prison, so it was deprived of enough water, really, so deprived of enough medicine, deprived of enough food, so it's just sustenance levels. It was an open-air prison that people were living in intolerable conditions. And if you think about it, for decades and decades, there's been a call on the international community to take action against Israel for breaching international law, for their criminal acts against the Palestinian people that have gone unheard. But the international community have not acted. And so October the 7th, whenever people think about that, was a desperate act of people who have been ignored and have been, the international community have allowed to be regularly bombed, imprisoned without trial. And on October the 7th they took hostages. That's a breach of international law. Imprisoning people without trial, taking people from their families in order to apply pressure to get people to leave the area and so on, is also a breach of international law. And so when you start talking about the negotiations to free the hostages, you're talking about hostage exchanges, but they've never put it on that basis. They never they never start off by talking about the colonial settler nature of Israel or its continued atrocity against the Palestinian people. And so, they portray it as something that I think most people who buy into that narrative now think Israel have gone over the top and started being more sympathetic to the Palestinians. But I think we have to knock on the head the whole idea that we can treat this assault by Israel on Gaza as some kind of response when it's almost business as usual as they want to expand again the borders of Israel.
Thank you. So the second myth-busting question, is it anti-Semitic to chant from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free?
Okay, well, what is considered anti-Semitic seems to be an ever-growing list as far as I can see. The IRHA definition of anti-Semitism includes any criticism of Israel, and holding a Palestinian flag is considered anti-Semitic by many. from the river to the sea has been used by both Palestine and Israel to refer to the geographic area that historically and up until 1948 was called Palestine, and over the years it's had several meanings. It was first used as an early Zionist slogan, which envisaged Israel extending from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. In the 1960s, it was used by the PLO to call for a decolonised state, which encompassed the whole of mandatory Palestine. In 1969, the PLO used it to call for a single democratic state for Arabs and Jews, which is, I think, still probably the most fair option. In 1977, it was used by the Likud party that used to say, between the sea and the Jordan there will be Israeli sovereignty. And Netanyahu in 2004 used the phrase west of the Jordan River to represent Israel. So today, pro-Palestinian activists, and we both use this phrase, this chant, see it as a call for peace and equality, whereas pro-Israeli activists interpret it as a call for the destruction of Israel, which I don't see it as at all. And you might remember Suella Braverman, she called for the phrase to be criminalised. I remember reading that instead of saying Palestine will be free, we could say Palestinians will be free, and I like this, and I think it fits better with the idea of a one-state solution where all citizens have equal rights and are free. Some countries are considering criminalising the use of the phrase from the river to the sea by pro-Palestinian supporters, but as far as I know, nowhere is suggesting that it should be criminalised if Israelis use the phrase.
Yeah, and I'm in that same kind of area in terms of my view of this. I mean, to my mind, this is partly about the debate about whether a two-state solution is viable or whether you need a democratic single state that everyone, all origins, has equal status in. And it's clear to me, and I think the Palestine movement has been so huge that people have started educating themselves, and more people are understanding that the two-state solution is a phony solution put forward by those people who don't want a solution in the area. And it is clear to me that a two-state solution would be two non-viable states. The only long-term viability of either would be to snuff out the other. And that's what Israel at the moment intends to do. And from the river to the sea is what the hardline Zionists want to achieve, which is either ethnic cleansing or genocide. When the Palestinian solidarity movement raises the slogan, it is not about driving all Jewish people out of Palestine. It's about securing freedom for everyone in the region. But I think we have to say that the 7 million displaced Palestinian refugees have to have the right to return, and any solution that does not give them the right to return isn't a proper solution. So I think it was really important that when Suella Braverman started talking about hate marches and clamping down on our movement and trying to ban this slogan and characterise it in a way that in a way that no one means it, that the response to that was to flood the streets with placards and papers with "From the River to the Sea" on them and chants, so it's impossible to ban it. And I think more and more people are educated in what we actually mean and don't see it as offensive, whether they agree with it or not, because the solidarity movement has been so huge. And I think more and more that debate has been won. My own union has a two-state solution position, but that's more and more being challenged. Although it wasn't debated and voted on at conference, the fringe meeting, people were clearly won over to what we need is a democratic one-state solution. Of course, it needs to involve the people in the area of deciding the future for that area. Yeah, I better finish in over 2 minutes now.
Thank you. So the third myth-busting question is the Israeli state committing war crimes? Is our government complicit in committing war crimes?
Right, well, the short answer to that would be yes and yes. I thought that the best way to answer that would actually be to look at organisations that have made statements to say that, you know, the Israeli state are committing war crimes, and I've chosen 4 organisations. So the United Nations Human Rights Council has identified clear evidence of war crimes. So on the 12th of June this year, they said that Israeli authorities are responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity, not only in Gaza, but also in East Jerusalem. Israel must immediately stop its military operations and attacks in Gaza, including the assault on Rafah, which we know they didn't, which has cost the lives of hundreds of civilians and displaced hundreds of thousands of people to unsafe locations without basic services and humanitarian assistance. And then Amnesty International, very early on in this, on the 20th of October, said there is damning evidence of war crimes being carried out by Israeli forces. They documented mass civilian casualties, horrific destruction, failure to take feasible precautions to spare civilians, failing to discriminate between civilian and military objectives. In their stated intent to destroy Hamas, Israeli forces have shown shocking disregard for civilian life. They've pulverised street after street, killing civilians on a mass scale and destroying essential infrastructure. Agnes Callamard, the Secretary General of Amnesty International, I don't know whether she still is, but she was on the 20th of October, said, for 16 years, Israel's illegal blockade has made Gaza into the world's biggest open-air prison. The international community must act now to prevent it becoming a giant graveyard. And then Human Rights Watch, an international NGO which conducts research into human rights, said on the 18th of October, Israel is using starvation of civilians as a method of warfare, which is a war crime. Israeli officials have made public statements expressing their aim to deprive civilians in Gaza of food, water and fuel, statements reflected in Israeli forces' military operations. The Israeli government should not attack objects necessary for the survival of the civilian population. It must lift its blockade of the Gaza Strip and restore electricity and water. And then B'Tselem, which is the Israeli Information Center for Human Rights in the occupied territories, and their statement about themselves says that it strives for a future in which human rights, liberty and equality are guaranteed to all people, Palestinian and Jews alike, living between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. Such a future will only be possible when the Israeli occupation and apartheid regime end. So their statement is, Israel is committing the war crime of starvation in the Gaza Strip. The severe hunger that has developed in the Gaza Strip is not a result of fate, but the product of a deliberate and conscious Israeli policy. It has been openly declared by decision makers, including members of the Israeli War Cabinet. Reducing masses to begging for food and using starvation as a method of warfare requires utter dehumanization. Sadly, the dehumanization of Palestinians in Israeli society has accelerated in recent months. And I thought I'd just add that yesterday B'Tselem issued another statement saying that Israel is systematically abusing Palestinian detainees in torture camps, subjecting them to severe violence and sexual assaults.
So yeah, the answer's yes to both, and I think they've recently found that 20 Palestinian prisoners taken prisoner in the West Bank, there's thousands of them in prison, have been killed in prison. So they're killing prisoners. The death count, the figures are just horrific. And if you're talking about 40,000 people known to be dead, 10,000 children, and these are people who've been identified, and it's very likely there's lots of people missing. It's very likely the actual numbers are much higher. There is a systematic targeting of civilians. It's just horrific that when Keir Starmer was in opposition and the question was put to him, are Israel right to deprive the people of Gaza of medicine and water? He said yes. This is, the loyal opposition supporting the British government's support for Israel. Now Prime Minister, our government has long supported Israel. It's one of the reasons that Israel gets away with breaking international law, with illegal settlements under international law, its continued expansion and so forth, is because Britain, like the United States of America, has always supported Israel. Originally, this was because Britain saw Israel, that's what I said, was a loyal little Ulster in the Middle East, a client regime, that by backing it and arming that regime, you could have a little powerful force that could keep in check the other local regimes, because oil is such an important resource. And of course, it's not Britain that is anymore the most powerful imperialist power in the world. It's the United States of America who have taken that on, and Britain is now the loyal supporter of the US. So they continue to sell arms to Israel, to support Israel. Yes, it's good that Keir Starmer and the Starmer government has started to shift in their rhetoric and started to talk about looking at which arms they can stop, calling for a ceasefire, but not in a meaningful way. That shows the pressure they're under from our movement, and I think it shows that if we continue to put them under pressure, we can make those almost meaningless kind of gestures, those near things, into reality, so they do actually start stopping arms sales to Israel. They should really boycott Israel while it's doing this, and until you get peace in the Middle East. But at the moment, our government unfortunately is complicit in war crimes, and all power to South Africa and their legal challenge as well, which I think was marvellous.
Okay, that's the last of those questions, and it leads us on to, following on from what you've just said, Keith, it leads us on to the final question to our panellists, which is, how can we put pressure on our politicians, both local and national, to work towards winning a permanent resolution for freedom and justice for all living between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea? First of all, you, Debbie.
Well, I find this is quite a difficult one. As the Palestine Solidarity Campaign met with Stephen Lloyd when he was our MP, he signed a few early day motions that we'd asked him to sign. We then had a few meetings, I think it was during COVID, with Caroline Ansell, because they were online, that's why I'm thinking it was during COVID. And there was just nothing we could say that would shift her position of support for Israel at all. She didn't recognise Israel as an apartheid state. Whatever we talked about, she said, I just don't recognise that from my visits to Israel. And of course now in Eastbourne we have a new MP, Josh Bavarindi. I've met with him individually when he was adopted as a candidate to talk about Palestine, and the PSC have met with him twice. The last time we met with him was just before Christmas, and we were penciled in for a 45-minute meeting, and he met with us for over 2 hours, despite having to rush off and do something to do with Christmas very late. So he gave us a lot of time and gave us a lot of thought, and we haven't met with him since. So I feel locally that's what we can do. I don't know what difference it makes. Now that we have a Lib Dem here, we also have Lib Dem have the first Palestinian MP, Layla Moran. There's been quite a lot about her family that were in Gaza. They're Christians. They were holed up in a church, so she's been able to talk a little bit about that. I've been a bit disappointed generally I felt that she could be saying more. and continue to do, go on the marches. We were on the march at the weekend. Continue to do what we can in Eastbourne to raise awareness. I just feel, I don't know what else we can do. I feel I can't think of what else we can do. I feel we're doing all we can, and just having those conversations with people.
I think the movement has been incredibly effective, but obviously not enough. But I think it is clear that Keir Starmer knows that Labour vote suffered during the general election because of the issue of Palestine in particular. I mean, they say that it's Muslim votes they've lost, and I'm sure they lost a lot of Muslim votes. But there was a campaign, no ceasefire, no vote. And I think, the election of independence, the re-election of Jeremy Corbyn, I think Keir Starmer, who's got a very big majority, but actually not on a very big vote, knows that if he continues to do something that's desperately unpopular, 85% of people want a ceasefire. If he continues down that road, then he's going to be unpopular and struggle with the next election, and that's because of the mass movement. So I think keeping up the protests, keeping up the visibility, making sure that the Palestine flag is flying everywhere. I think the boycott, disinvestment and sanctions campaign is incredibly important. And of course, they're trying to legally shut that down. And hopefully we put that to bed. But more and more people are winning within universities and so on. They're winning disinvestment arguments. And so I think that's an important thing that we can do. Because Israel relies on support from international states, more so than South Africa did during the era of apartheid, for instance, where sanctions played a role. So I think the boycott, disinvestment and sanctions campaign is an important thing that we can do, not just in terms of individually choosing not to bank with Barclays, or you shouldn't bank with Barclays, and choosing not to buy Israeli produce and that sort of thing. But I think also the campaigns in places like campuses to get their universities to disinvest are incredibly important. Keep up the protesting and keep on piling with the pressure.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. That's the end of the panellists' questions. We have a few people here with us today. I don't know whether anyone here would like to either make a contribution or ask a question.
Following on from that previous question about how do we influence our politicians, what should we be asking them for? What are the political opportunities at the moment for the Palestinian peace movement?
Well, I suppose it would be really good to have our local politician, our local MP, raising something in Parliament, actually following on. There are a few politicians that regularly raise it in Parliament. I forgot to mention earlier on that we did manage to get Eastbourne Borough Council to vote for a ceasefire, which might seem quite a small thing, but I felt it was quite an achievement. And in the wording of their motion, they also talked about Palestinian hostages, and not many people talk about Palestinian hostages. So so that, I suppose that would be my hope. Obviously, the locally, the person that supported us the most has been the Green Party, and we very much welcome the support of the Green Party, and that will continue. So I think we'll just have to continue having conversations with Josh and with anybody else that will listen in Parliament.
Yeah, I mean, I think the principal demand on politicians is to raise the issue and do it publicly, because it's very easy for a politician to, in a secret meeting, so I agree with you. I like they need to publicly make a stand. But I think in terms of the government, we've got a government who's talking about looking at which arms they should not send to Israel, we need to keep on the pressure on that and make sure that that moves into the space of banning arms sales to Israel. We need to look at the issue of applying sanctions to a regime like Israel. And I think that the more the movement continues, the more pressure they're under. And those are the demands that we should put to them to break those links, stop the support, but actually break those links in a material way.
Someone else, a question?
I've got two questions really. One is about lobbying. The Labour government has said that it's going to look at the issue of lobbying, I think. But the Israel lobby seems very strong. I wonder whether you've got any thoughts about how that can be changed, how that can be effective. The second question was really about settlements, because you talked about settler colonialism. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about the role of settlements in that.
When you say settlements, you mean the expansion of the illegal settlements, yes. Well, I think I would really like our government to issue a statement. I don't think they have, condemning the expansion of the illegal settlements. The land that Palestinians have to live on is becoming smaller and smaller, and also it's being pushed into these tiny enclaves because of the settlements, because of the illegal settlements, and then because of the wall and because of the checkpoints. And now, along with the illegal settlements, we have the dreadful behaviour of the settlers that are supported by the Israeli army to attack Palestinians, and it seems to be without any redress at all. They just seem to be you see the settlers attacking Palestinians, and the Israeli army just looking on, making sure that no settlers get hurt. I don't know. I've forgotten what your first question was. Oh, lobbying. Yes. Again, I feel quite despondent when you look at the list of MPs and Labour MPs as well that are being funded by Israel, by the Israeli lobby. I think there ought to be a lot more publicity about that. What do they have to do to get that financial support? Is very worrying. I don't know whether the same is true. I don't know whether there's any Palestinian lobbying going on. I think those MPs that support Palestine are doing it because it's the right thing to do, because of they have, like Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, and yes. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, of course, every country has put some resources into lobbying and trying to ensure they've got influence across the world. I think Israel's lobby is particularly effective and well planned, and of course because they are supporting the indefensible, that's a particular problem. But I actually think that it's not that politicians in the US and Britain are somehow bought off and bribed by Israel, and that's why they support Israel. I think it comes from the other way, that historically Britain and now the US see Israel as a useful, not only do they give lots of aid to Israel, the United States gives lots of aid to the Egyptian regime as well, particularly with generals and so on. And it's about keeping the region's populace under control and making sure there isn't an outbreak of wider democracy, because if you have wider democracy in a region where oil is so important, you might use those profits to improve the position of the local population rather than taking it into the profits of the multinationals. So I think this is kind of where it comes from. Now, of course, Israel, then starts doing things that are embarrassing to the US, and they like to try to rein it in a bit, but then they're never going to stop supporting them out of their own imperialist interests until it becomes something that is no longer of benefit to them, and that can either be because of domestically people aren't willing to accept support for Israel anymore, or well, I suspect more likely that Israel ceases to be of any value in the region because there's been an outbreak of democracy and social equality in the Middle East that leads Israel to be kind of isolated and of no value. So I think lobbying is a problem, but I think it can be overplayed in terms of, is it Israel that's in control of everything across the world, which I know no one's saying, or is it actually because of imperialist interests supporting what Israel are getting up to? And the settlements question. I mean, so I was mentioned before about the continued breach of international law by Israel. The expansion of the settlements is something that the Israeli regime encourages, and as you say, the IDF look on while it's taking place. It's part of the whole Zionist project is to create a greater Israel. It feeds in, doesn't it, when they are trying to also convince Jewish people that they're unsafe in places like Britain, so that they go to Israel. And it's the situation effectively is you have Europeans born and bred in places like Manchester, parents who are from Europe, or born and bred in places like New York, going to Israel, taking the land of people who are born and bred in Palestine, kicking them out of their homes on any pretext and excuse, and either taking their homes or bulldozing and building new homes in that area. Every expansion in recent times has been decreed against international law, and there won't be any sanctions against Israel because the United States, until recently Britain, vetoes any actions against Israel, and that's what you've got to stop, because that continued expansion is part of the process we're seeing now, escalated big time in terms of Gaza, which is an attempt to ethnically cleanse the region to create a greater Israel, and that atrocity is going to continue until the international community stop supporting Israel and start supporting what they say is international law that doesn't allow Israel to do these sorts of things.
I think we may have one more contribution or question.
Just a reflection about your point of view. What do you think about people shying away from obviously what's happening in Palestine, the massacre of children and so on, particularly in artistic groups across the world? Is there a sense of, I can't say anything, I don't want to get involved, and that put pressure on everyone because no one wants to say anything, and people shy away from the responsibilities of consciousness. So it happens not just in this country, across the world, really. So what do you think about this?
Obviously, everyone should speak up, and it's there are plenty of artists that do. Notable individual, of course, is David Gilmour from Pink Floyd, who uses his platform to speak in favour of Palestinian rights, and there's a rapper Low-Key. But you're absolutely right that there's this, there's a very strong attempt to close down the discussion, and of course they weaponise allegations of anti-Semitism to do that, and there's nothing more powerful, and we saw how it was used against Jeremy Corbyn and so on. There's nothing more powerful to use against people who are decently minded than to accuse them of some kind of racism. It's trying to just shut down the argument, shut down the debate. But I think amongst artists and performers and anyone who's got any kind of a platform, you've always got some people who want to shy away from anything political because they don't want to alienate some of their audience or whatever. and then you've always got the braver individuals who think, well, I've got a platform now, and so I've got to use it to do the right thing. And I think it's, sometimes people think that the artists speaking out build a movement. I don't think that's true. I think that the existence of a movement inspires artists to speak out. But when they do speak out, they then feed back and help to build that movement. So you saw that with the civil rights movement in the 1960s, with the inspirational music that came out of that, and how that music itself then encouraged people to continue the struggle along with other things. And I think we are starting to see that with Palestine. It's such a huge movement. You are starting to see more and more people making their voice heard. But yeah, I mean, it's terrible that they try to close that down, and some people are scared off. But even Charlotte Church will lead a choir singing from the river to the sea, and she'll make it clear what she actually means by that.
And I was just, it brought to mind the Turner Prize winner in Eastbourne, Jessie Darling, when they won, waved the Palestinian flag. So I felt that was a real good event in Eastbourne. I've just started following Annie Lennox, actually. Annie Lennox is really speaking out about the horrors that are going on. And of course Roger Waters is another huge supporter of Palestine. So I think they are emerging. There's a petition going around at the moment from the Royal Academy because they withdrew. Has everybody seen it? They withdrew a photograph that was put in for the exhibition of somebody holding up a Free Palestine poster, and there's a big petition going saying to reinstate that as an entry. That's within this last week. So so I think artists in all sorts of forms are beginning to be a bit more brave and speak out. We've seen quite a lot of actors using their voice to speak out. So yeah, I feel and I find it encouraging when you see someone else. You say Charlotte Church, I think it's fabulous. Watching her, yeah. Oh.
It keeps turning itself off for some reason. Just to add to that, there was the Olympic game person that went viral.
Yeah.
I've forgotten the name of the man, but that actually went viral.
And one
And
of the
he was-
footballers recently.
Yeah,
there was another one. Yeah.
Or maybe it was football that went
Yeah.
viral, but something went viral. But he was just talking about football, and he got someone saying, like an Israeli person, like saying you shouldn't be talking about this. He said, I'm just talking about football. And then he ended up just doing a chant. He got so annoyed with being pestered. He ended up doing a chant. That was someone using their platform.
Absolutely.
Before I do a final statement, summary, because that's the end of, thank you very much, both of you. Before I do just a final summary, I do want to read a poem. In Eastbourne, last 2 Sundays ago, some of the groups came together, including PSD and SWP and Trade Council and Friends of Muslim Mosque, and we put on a Palestinian peace protest and picnic and marched through town very loudly with drums and had a rally and at Wishtower Slopes. And at that rally there were poetry and music and speeches, and one of the poets, Tasmin, instead of writing a poem herself, she found it too difficult. She said she found it too difficult to write a poem herself. She read out a poem by Mozab Abu Taha, which she read this out, a Palestinian poet, and it's things you may find hidden in my ear. 1. When you open my ear, touch it gently. My mother's voice lingers somewhere inside. Her voice is the echo that helps recover my equilibrium. when I feel dizzy during my attentiveness. You may encounter songs in Arabic, poems in English I recite to myself, or a chant to the chirping birds in our backyard. When you stitch the cut, don't forget to put all these back in my ear. Put them back in order as you would do books on your shelf. 2. The drone's buzzing sound, the roar of an F-16, the screams of bombs falling on houses, on fields, on bodies, of rockets flying away, rid my small ear canal of them all. Spray the perfume of your smiles on the incision, inject the song of life into my veins to wake me up. Gently beat the drum so my mind may dance with yours, my doctor, day and night. Finally, everybody, Eastbourne Solidarity is going to be doing more of these interviews. We support many different organisations in the town and groups, and we want to give a voice to the different organisations' campaigns that are going on, and so hopefully we'll be doing more of these live streams. I do like Mondays, maybe they'll be on Mondays, but meanwhile that's the end of this one, so thank you everyone.